Hey Mandy Maniacs, and happy Friday for your drop. Wendigo Edition. I love Wendigos. They're my favorite monster. I hope you have been enjoying the week so far. One of you suggested I should wear a black dress for my Friday for drop. But, well, I don't know where any of them are. I think they're my summer stuff. I had one of them a few weeks ago for the cult week, if you remember that. But that, noped out of existence on me, apparently. I don't know. So I hope this ripped up variety is working for you. Also, you guys suggested wear the red hair. I miss having red hair, honestly. Now, for the would you survive? You're camping deep, deep in the woods. You crawl out of your tent to douse the fire before going to bed. That's when you notice something standing in the tree line. It looks human-esque, almost. It's tall. When you get a closer look at it, you see that it has antlers. Its flesh is rotting, its stomach hanging open, hollow, nothing but a rib cage. Blood crusted on its mouth. Long, claw-like hands and hooves. Standing on its two hooves, looking at you. Looks a great deal like a deer. What do you do next? Do you walk up and give it a great big hug? Do you go back to your tent, zipping it up and hiding in it, hoping maybe it didn't see you? Or do you leave everything behind and run for your car, hoping like hell you can outrun it? What do you do, and would you survive? For the urban legend, the creepiest thing about a Wendigo, if you think about it, is the fact they don't start like a regular monster. All the other horror monsters in lore. It starts as a regular human being. A human being that becomes obsessed with cannibalism, greed, or starvation during brutal winter conditions. It's said to be the Minnesota Northwoods Monster. So, it's never satisfied. The more it eats, the more it wants. The hungrier it becomes. It grows taller and more hollowed out. Starving more with each meal, only wanting more, consumed completely. Even worse, legend has it that simply thinking about the creature too much will draw it in. So, if you should hear a whistle or a familiar voice outside your window, you're cooked. You guys, I'm totally screwed. They say thinking about it too much will draw it in. You guys, I obsess about Wendigos, especially this week. That's not good. And look at how much I talk about cannibalism. Should I be worried? Nah. If I ever see a Wendigo, I'm gonna be like, let's frickin' go. I have a new best friend. Now for the Eli and Mara Wendigo story. It's gonna be great. And you know what I'm going to do for Sunday? Sunday's story is going to be another choose your own ending. You guys get to decide the fate. And it may seem like a very small and significant decision, but it's a big one. Alright, before I get right into reading this story I wrote for you guys, I'm going to warn you. It's a gory one that definitely pushes some mental boundaries, if you know what I mean. Maybe not, though. If you've listened to my other stories and been okay with it, you're going to be fine with this one. It just paints more... It's one of the more gory ones. Might not even be the goriest, but it's pretty gory. So, without further ado... this story, it's a super gory one. I like the term gormance. Not sure if anyone has ever used that, but I kind of just came up with that gory romance. Yeah, I'm sure you guys got it. But Yeah, this one is long for a Friday fear drop. Usually my ones at the end aren't that long. The one on Sunday, again, it's going to be Wendigo theme, and it's going to be completely different. We're actually going to have extra characters in that one, and it's going to be a choose your own ending. Anyway, this one's gory, but I think it's a beautiful love story. Of course I would. I wrote it. That probably sounds arrogant. Anyway, I'm going to shut up, read you the story. Here it goes. The spring evening should have felt like relief after winter's grip loosening, but out here, it didn't. The trees still held on to the cold like they resented letting it go. Eli lay flat on his back in the grass. Mara sat perched atop the soft, huge expanse of his belly, draped in his jacket. Eli would sooner freeze solid than let a single shiver touch her. Eli wrapped his arms around Mara, pulling her down, anchoring her deeper into his plush, cushiony middle. She shifted, her hips settling further into the warm, doughy curve of his stomach, like a giant pillow. Your arms are getting cold, she noted, reaching down to touch his exposed forearms. She frowned, feeling the chill on his skin. Eli, you're freezing. I couldn't feel better. I have you close to me, he said, brushing a strand of hair from Mara's face. She laughed. I'm more than close. I'm practically inside of you at this point. Eli's gaze darkened as he stared up at her. I would like to have you buried deep inside of me, he said, staring up into her eyes with that familiar intensity he always looked at her with. You're a goner, Eli, she whispered, her voice full of dark affection as she leaned down, pressing her lips against his. Just as they were getting up to head back towards the cabin, a strange clicking sound came from not far in the woods. The clicking sound echoed again. Eli, listen, Mara whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of thrill and wonder. The way it whistles, that's exactly how the stories describe a Wendigo. Eli huffed. Wendigo, huh? He didn't believe in monsters, other than the two-legged kind. Some local lowlife or a hiker who lost his mind. That's who we're dealing with, he thought to himself. But the look of curiosity in Mara's eyes convinced him. He looked down at her, his gaze heavy with a terrifying level of devotion. Wendigo or a crazy human with a blade? You stay glued to my side. I'm not risking anything happening to you. Mara reached out, sinking her hand deep into the plush softness of his big stomach. Believe me, I have no intention of moving, she murmured, her fingers kneading into the warm, heavy weight of him. Is that right? He laughed, a flicker of smirk finally breaking his stoic expression. Mm-hmm, she hummed, pushing her palm further into the pillowy warmth of his middle. Good, then let's go find your monster. The trees parted, revealing a small clearing that looked like a snapshot of a nightmare. A tent stood half collapsed, its nylon sides flapping in the wind. A lantern lay on its side, the glass shattered. Something dark stained the snow beside it. It looked like someone had been there recently. Mara's breath hitched, her hands still buried deep in the comforting warmth of Eli's stomach. Eli, look, they didn't even pack up, they just ran. Mara pressed closer. A shiver ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. You still think it's a person? Look at the claw marks on that cooler. Eli didn't even blink. He reached over, his huge hand covering hers and pressing it firmer against his belly, anchoring her to him. He pointed a finger to the side of the tent, where there was a dark, frozen trail of something leading away, like drag marks disappearing into the tree line. He turned his head slightly, his gaze intense and fanatical as he looked down at her. Stay close. If anything comes through that tree line, it has to get through every inch of me first, and I promise you, it won't survive the attempt. Mara looked up at him, the flirtatious spark returning to her eyes, despite the eerie scene. I'm not going anywhere, Eli. You're my addiction. Mara said, her voice thick with desire, now pressing both of her hands deep into him as she leaned in, kissing his chest. Eli looked at Mara, a mix of raw devotion and confusion. Mara wasn't scared. She was excited. The sudden crack of wood behind them was as sharp as a gunshot, echoing through the hollow silence of the clearing. They both turned. Out of the darkness, two pale, sunken eyes caught the dim light, hovering nearly 7 feet off the ground. Eli stepped in front of Mara, keeping her safely behind him. The creature lurched forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, as it breached the circle of shattered lantern light. It was a nightmare of bone and leathery hanging skin, standing over 7 feet tall, with a crown of jagged antlers. Its ribcage was visible through its gaunt chest, and its eyes were nothing more than glowing pits of hunger. "Eli," she whispered, her voice trembling, as adrenaline and disgust began to replace her feelings of desire she had been lost in moments before. "It's real." "It is," Eli agreed, his voice calm, already forming a plan to protect her. The Wendigo made a low snorting sound that sounded a lot like a deer. It was close enough to smell the strong stench of decay. Eli stood like an unshakable monolith, a wall of soft, heavy protection between Mara and the starving nightmare. He didn't flinch as the Wendigo's claws twitched. The creature's hollowed eyes were fixed in a ghoulish, starving intensity on him. When it sinks its teeth in, you run," he whispered to her. "No, Eli, please," Mara pleaded. "It can't chase you if it's eating me," he said, a grim, sacrificial smile touching his lips. The Wendigo tilted its head into the air, bellowing out a loud screech. "Get ready to run," Eli whispered to her. The Wendigo screeched again, and then lunged. It didn't go for his throat. It went for the center of his mass, its long, serrated claws burying themselves deep into the soft, heavy depths of his stomach and chest. The sound was a wet, horrific tear, the creature's claws disappearing into his flesh. Eli didn't recoil. He didn't even flinch. Through the staggering pain of the creature beginning its feast, Eli kept his gaze locked on Mara's. His eyes were wide and burning with a terrifying, absolute intensity. "Run," he demanded, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. His eyes pouring every ounce of his love into Mara with a final look. Mara finally broke. She turned and bolted into the darkness, the sound of her boots crunching on the snow, fading in the distance. Eli didn't look away from the spot she had been until he was certain she was gone. Only then did he look at the monster, buried deep in his midsection. He let out a low, defiant growl, his grip tightening on the Wendigo's skull. Deep in the woods, Mara ran until her lungs felt like they were filled with glass. Every time she stumbled, the image of Eli's intense, fearless eyes burned into her mind. Tears stung her eyes. The horror was visceral. Eli could feel the creature's icy breath against his skin as it began to tear, its head jerking back and forth with wet, rhythmic snaps that echoed in the frozen silence. A lesser man would have collapsed, but Eli's devotion was a physical force. He looked down at the monster, watching its elongated claws disappear into the soft, warm depths of him, pulling and shredding with a mindless, starving ferocity. He didn't scream. Instead, he let out a low, guttural laugh that sprayed a mist of crimson into the air. "Is that all?" he rasped, his voice bubbling with the copper tang of his own blood. He reached down with his thick, powerful hands and clamped them onto the Wendigo's head, his fingers digging into the creature's sunken eye sockets and leathery scalp. His grip tightened, using all of his strength he had left, until he heard the creature's skull begin to crack under his palms. He didn't just hold the beast, he dominated it, his thick fingers slick with his own blood, dug deeper into the creature's leathery temples and jagged ridges of its eye sockets. "You won't get her," Eli growled, with a sickening, resonant crack that sounded like a frozen lake splitting wide. Eli's hands forced the creature's skull inward. The Wendigo's shrieks cut off with a wet, bubbly gurgle. Its hollow eyes rolled back, and the frantic clawing slowed to a weak, twitching tremor. Its body went limp, dangling like a broken doll against Eli's blood-soaked front. He didn't fall immediately. He stood there for a long, quiet minute, the only sound, the ragged, wet rasp of his own breathing. Slowly, Eli sank to his knees in the crimson-stained snow, his hands still locked around the dead monster's head. His purpose wasn't finished. Mara was still out there in the dark, and he had to be sure. He tossed the Wendigo's head aside. With a grunt of pure agonizing effort, Eli forced his legs to move. As he stepped away from the hemlock, the true horror of his sacrifice became clear. The Wendigo's claws had done more than just tear. They had unmade him entirely. As he lurched forward, he felt the heavy, wet slip of his own viscera spilling from the ruined cavern of his stomach. He didn't look down. He simply reached back, with one gore-slicked hand, tucking the ruins of his midsection against his body as if trying to hold his very life inside, and began to walk. Each step was a monumental feat of defiance. He followed the trail Mara had left, his own heavy boots carving deep, jagged trenches in the white powder. Behind him, a broad, horrific ribbon of crimson painted in the snow. He was dragging himself toward her through sheer devotion, his mind stripped of everything but the need to see her face one last time. He stumbled, his massive frame tilting dangerously, but caught himself on a frostbitten tree, his bloody handprint staining the bark. He was a walking nightmare, refusing to let his heart stop until he reached the end of her tracks. "Not yet," he wheezed, the words more blood than breath. He could feel his intestines dragging in the snow behind him, snagging on frozen roots, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon, casting long, cold shadows across the snow. And then he saw her, standing, staring at him with wide eyes, was his beloved Mara. His eyes heavy, he fell to his knees. Mara, registering it was him, ran to him, wrapping her arms around what was left of him. A bloody mess she almost hadn't even recognized. He was open completely, from the chest down. The soft, heavy body she had adored, now a ruin of shredded meat and spilled life. The fact that he was alive seemed completely impossible, considering the damage. "No," she whispered, her hands shaking violently. She wasn't repulsed. She didn't turn away. Instead, she fell into the gore, her knees sinking into the blood-soaked snow. She began to gather the wet, steaming coils of his viscera, with frantic, desperate hands trying to shove them back inside the deep cavern of his midsection. She was sobbing, but refused to accept the inevitable. She fumbled for the needle and thread in her pocket. "You're mine. You can't die," she said. Eli watched her through a haze, his vision as gray as his skin. He felt her hands, small and cold, working inside of him, pushing the ruins of his body back together. His body too far into shock to feel any pain. With a trembling hand, she began to stitch. She pushed the heavy needle through the thick, pale layers of his flesh, pulling the thread tight to close the jagged gaps the Wendigo had left. His eyes never left hers. He was watching the person he had died for try to weave him back into existence. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her face splattered with his blood as she worked with a feverish, rhythmic intensity. "Look at me, Eli. Keep looking at me." He did. Even as the light in his eyes began to dim, he forced himself to remain present. He watched the needle dip and dive through his flesh. the thread drawing the edges of his stomach back into some sort of semblance of the shape she had loved. A desperate, bloody craftsmanship. Under the pale morning sky, the only sound was the wet snip of thread and the ragged, stubborn pulse of a heart that refused to stop as long as she was by his side. Alright guys, that was a long one, probably the longest one I've ever written, but I feel that one was a lot more romantic. I don't know, what do you guys think? Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the gorgeousness of the story. Definitely a lot of viscera to unpack there, pun intended. So, hope you enjoyed it. Comment, let me know, and I hope you're excited for Sunday's story.